Chelsea of Nested Sleep. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about how starting your baby on solid foods can affect their sleep. There can definitely be highs and lows when it comes to starting your baby on solid foods, but it 100% can affect their sleep. And so many parents ask me, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about my child's sleep. Why are we talking about nutrition? Or why are we talking about any stomach issues or GI issues, any concerns in that area? And that's because, especially as my training as a pediatric nurse practitioner, I was taught to really look at all the different body systems and how they're tying into one particular issue or one particular problem, because it's usually not just solely related to sleep. There's usually some other factors going on that's causing some sleep disturbance. So when we talk about starting solid foods, this is something that we want to start looking at usually around 4 to 6 months of age. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has mentioned or stated that a baby generally by 4 to 6 months of age has doubled their birth weight. So they're usually by this point, at least about 13 pounds. And usually by that point, some other things you would want to start looking at developmentally to tell you that they're ready to start solid foods would be that they can hold their head up straight, so they have good neck control, and that they're sitting in a chair, or that they can even sit up on the floor. So you want to make sure they have good tone. And so you, again, want to look at their weight, want to look at their neck control, want to look at their sitting up and their tone. And then their level of interest. So are they starting to, say, open their mouth when they're sitting at the kitchen table with you? So these are all things that the American Academy of Pediatrics says, okay, these are some things to start looking at to decide if you want to start solid foods. Now, many of you may say or may see in some literature that most of the nutrition in the first year of life is from either breast milk or formula. And that is absolutely true. But it is very important, both from a sensory and motor concern or improvement, you do want to still introduce foods both for flavors and to start using the jaw and using these muscles. There is a window of time that ideally want to start some solid foods in the first 8 months of life at some point, and so that window is not completely lost. So that's something that you do want to start. And within that time, there can be some sleep disturbance happening. Okay, so now that we know your child is probably ready to start some solid foods, it's up to you to look into what method you want to use. So some people are using baby-led weaning, other people may start with purees. All have been shown to be helpful. I don't have a particular preference. I actually did a mix of both with my children, and they're both good eaters right now. Don't know if it had anything to do with that. So what are other things when we talk about sleep? How is nutrition related? How can it both positively impact their sleep, and how could it potentially negatively impact their sleep? So let's first talk about the positives. So number one, when babies are first born, they're born with a level of iron stores. So they're born with a level of iron stores from mom. They're getting a little extra now due to delayed cord clamping, which is helping in increasing those iron stores for longer. Because as many of you may know, breast milk does not have iron in it. It doesn't have the level of iron in it that baby needs solely throughout the first year of life. So in addition to any other supplements that your pediatrician may recommend for iron, if that's needed, you want to look at how starting solid foods can give that baby some iron. So iron is useful for a lot of things, but let's talk about how iron can help with your baby or for any adult sleep. So iron is, when you look at iron, you want to always look at the total stores of iron in your body. And we know that, again, babies' iron stores are typically depleted by about 6 months of age. And so when we look at substituting that, it's a great method to start substituting with some solid food, and solid food that is rich in iron. Because when you look at sleep, iron can, if you're depleted in iron, can cause you to have more restless sleep, so moving more frequently during the night, and have increased awakenings during sleep, potentially related to that restless sleep. Now, this is not the case that every child that has low iron is going to have, some sort of restless sleep, but it can contribute, and it's always something that you would want to look into, especially why not try to be preventative about this and give baby iron-rich solid foods. So that's always one good thing that can help positively when you're starting baby on solid foods. Now, when you think about things that are iron-rich foods that you can give, so anything that is like green leafy vegetables, so spinach can have it, and you can either obviously be making your own baby food, or you can be pureeing, or you can be purchasing all of them and just looking at what vegetables, mostly dark green vegetables, are higher in iron. Also, there's a green called amaranth, and that can be used and made into kind of like a cereal, and that's very high in iron as well. Okay, so besides the iron, what other positive things can baby food or starting solid foods bring to your baby and their sleep? So we know when we looked at some evidence that when babies are starting solid foods and getting more of their feeds during the day than at night, they actually do have longer stretches of sleep at night where they don't need to eat. And so what that means is they still have awakenings during the night. Those awakenings aren't going to go away because we all have awakenings at the end of our sleep cycles. So babies that are getting solid foods versus babies that are not getting solid foods or are getting less calories are not necessarily, those awakenings are not going to go away. But they are now getting more of their calories during the day if they have solid foods than they're getting at night. And so that kind of retrains your body system to be working and digesting and doing all of those things more during the daytime. And that's helpful for better sleep overnight. And I'll link that research study here. And then what are some negatives that can potentially cause some sleep disruption or sleep disturbance? So anytime you're going to be starting solid foods for baby, there can be, remember, they have an immature gut, they're not used to digesting this food yet, and they can have just very sensitive systems. So sometimes there can be constipation, sometimes there can be diarrhea. Most babies that are breastfed are not having constipation, so that's something you would want to bring up to your pediatrician. But even if you don't have an allergy to a food, you can have some sensitivity because this is, again, you're introducing solid foods that baby has never had before. And so there can be some sensitivity. So you'd want to, again, follow the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations for usually doing 3 to 5 days in between new foods, so you can see and assess what their stomach is going to do, how it's going to handle with that particular food. Because if you have an upset tummy, can't talk tonight. If you have an upset stomach, then you can have more awakenings. Your awakenings can be more prolonged tonight just because you're uncomfortable. So if you're gassy, if you have constipation or diarrhea, obviously those things can contribute. So start with foods that are not going to be as sensitive on the gut. And if you do see some additional diarrhea or constipation, taking a little bit of a step back, just taking a little bit of a pause. Again, not an allergy, but just a sensitivity to that new introduction. You can go back to it later. So those are some things you'd want to kind of keep an eye out in terms of some potential negative side effects for starting solid foods. But certainly, as you can see, positives are outweighing the negatives. And so looking at those factors that we talked about at the beginning, if your baby is ready for it, and certainly if they're older than 4 to 6 months old, then it definitely is ready to give it a try. Hopefully that was helpful in giving you some information on how solid foods can affect your baby's sleep.